hounds, chase ghosts, come sleep, watch out, demons are coming, run, sleep, hide, spirits, ghosts, hide, demons, hounds, ghosts, demons are coming.
Welcome home, my little hellhounds. Tonight we have 8 scary stories to sink our hellish teeth into. If you have any scary stories you want narrated on the channel, then submit them to Reddit r/homeofscares. If you like this content, then please click that subscribe button and push that like icon till it bleeds. Now let's get right into it. Creepy encounter walking home, posted by Unethical Energy. I got high for the first time at a party my best friend invited me to. It was a white version of a trap house. I saw something in the house that scars me to this day. Not related. But after that I told my friend we can't stay here. Since he's my bro, he agrees, and we walk back 3 miles to his house at 1 in the morning. We're a mile from his house and there's the long road that curves slowly and for a while, and it was already kind of creepy, with some street lights broken and flickering on and off and turning on and off every minute. Close to his house is wooded in between the houses, so no houses around, and so we're talking and looking forward, and this school bus that has fully tinted out windows, some broken and boarded up windows, just slowly creeping along at like 10 to 15 miles per hour on a 35 mile per hour road. I'm still high at that point and I just completely freeze and I get goosebumps. Just imagine all the horrible things that could have happened. But it just drives, but at a creeping speed. I asked my friend and he saw it too. We both ran back to his house that last mile. For some sophomores getting high for the first time, that was a very creepy experience. Still, to this day, I don't know exactly what it was. Posted by Overweight Chinchilla. Okay, so at the time I was experiencing these occurrences, I was about 10 years old, branching all the way out into my late teens, 18 to 19. I'm turning 26 by the end of the year. My parents got divorced and they had split custody of my brother and I. My dad remarried and they bought a house together not far from my mum's, so it was just easier on a lot of levels. The home I was experiencing these things was at my dad's. The home had 3 levels, including the basement. My stepmom had 2 sons, so we needed a lot of room. There was 3 bedrooms on the upper floor, which is where I had a room. My parents shared a room, and my 2 stepbrothers shared a room. Basic kitchen, dining, and living room on the main floor, along with a 3-season attached porch. The basement was due for a remodel, and my dad owned his own construction business and was able to remodel the whole basement. There was an existing room that my real brother occupied. Once remodelled, both my stepbrothers got their own room in the basement along with my brother, which left me, the only young one, to live upstairs with my parents' room right across the hall. One of the first occurrences I remember was my bedroom door wanting to seemingly swing open on its own and slowly pick up speed and bang against my closet door because the knobs would touch. It's worth noting that my closet was the one with access to the attic. This definitely got me wondering why, and at the time I never had the thought of it possibly being something paranormal. So I remember checking my door and noticing that it was off hinge and would literally just swing open, if not closed shut. So that's what I did. The next night I closed my door tight, pushed on it and then tugged on the handle to make sure it wouldn't just swing open and make a loud banging noise. I fall asleep, but something wakes me up, and not even 5 seconds after I'm consciously awake, my door handle turns and my door opens as if someone lightly pushes it open, and it swings and bangs my closet door. At this point I didn't know what to do, so I throw my blankets over my head and got into a fetal position and ended up just sleeping through the night. Nothing else happened. Second time I encountered this thing was an evening my brothers and I were playing football outside, and one of my stepbrothers and I go inside to get a drink of water, and out of the corner of my eye leading upstairs from the entrance of the front house was a little boy sitting at the top of my steps, halfway into the shadows and completely see-through. I quickly ran outside to rejoin my brothers and asked if they could come take a look. We did and ended up not seeing anything. I'm not exactly sure as to when some of these next events occurred, but this was getting to a point that I had the feeling to tell my parents about this. I had the discussion with them and all my brothers at a breakfast one morning, and I brought up my concerns about living upstairs in the room that has the attic, with what's been going on with my door and just having that eerie feeling of not being wanted in your own room. Also, with seeing this little boy figure. My real brother didn't believe me, nor did my dad, but my stepmom chimes in. Not that she's been experiencing anything in the home, but wanted to let me know that she knew how I felt, and began to tell me about a story of her home in Texas before she moved up to Minnesota. She said it got so aggressive that she didn't feel safe in her own home. Neither did the kids, and she literally yelled at the spirit to go away and leave the home. She said it seemed to work and didn't have any occurrences since. I, for one, knew nothing about this, so now it really put me into a position of interest about what's going on, but also petrified with fear. Maybe my fear grew into it. The only other time I recall seeing the little boy was when I was in the kitchen, home alone, during the day, and at the exact moment of my looking at my microwave, I noticed a tall lady wearing a long dress, holding hands with the little boy I saw at the top of the stairs, walking behind me. They didn't look, just walked straight into the dining room. As I turned the way they were walking, nothing was there. I couldn't hear any footsteps. Nothing got cold, no airflow, and trust me, I tried to debunk this to see if something could make out those specific figures in the reflection of the microwave, but I couldn't get it to happen. Shortly after that, I told my parents I wanted to move into the basement because I didn't feel safe living in that room upstairs, and this way I could be closer to my brothers, whom I felt would connect on a similar level with me on this whole situation and make me feel safer. I ended up occupying my real brother's room, and he moved to a newly furnished bedroom, also in the basement. This is where most of the stuff occurred. So now that I'm living in the basement, it's not like these things happened every night. It was so subtle, minor things would happen maybe once or twice a month. But there were a couple of big ones that I will never forget. Now, some time has passed. I think I was about 16 or 17. Side note, my parents had a child, thus born my half-sister when I was 13, whom now occupies the first room I ever had. And in that room I was currently staying in was directly below my living room. Our living room had hardwood floors, and since we now had a 3-year-old in the house, she had Legos and other miscellaneous toys in the living room. One night during a weekend, I had a buddy spend the night. We had a night of gaming, stayed up past 1 AM, and I probably got to sleep around 2. We had a futon out in the living room of the basement, which is where he slept. Something wakes me up and I'm like, it's noon, wide awake. I start to hear some rustling in our vents from the bathroom across my room, and then I hear what sounded to me like our tote of Legos getting dumped onto the wood floor right above me. All I can remember is lying in fear, thinking that someone is in our home. Within a matter of seconds, I hear the basement door turn, the doorknob creak open, and I can't even explain how fast this thing ran down my stairs. But it made an insanely loud thumping sound as it hit every step, about 15 to 20 steps in a matter of 2 seconds. Then silence. I was terrified. I tried to move, and I physically couldn't move a muscle in my body. I was stuck. I couldn't even turn my head. All I could do was look around my dark room with my eyes. I tried to scream for my buddy out in the living room, just one wall from me, and I couldn't even make a sound. Felt like my mouth was closed shut and my airways blocked. Shortly after, I was able to move freely and jumped out of my bed and ran to my buddy, trying to wake him up, to tell him what just happened and to tell him that we need to get out of the house. He half wakes up. I explain to him and he says, "Oh, it's probably just the grudge." He passes back out and I'm freaking out at this point because of what just happened to me. So I wake him up again and he claims that he never said that and doesn't recall saying that. I end up sleeping by his side that night with the TV on. Now, at this point, almost everything I experienced, small or big, I would immediately tell my friends, because they were just as intrigued by the whole situation. They thought it was cool I had a ghost spirit thing in my house, and from my description of the little boy, they all deemed it harmless. I was not the only one who experienced random events happen in the basement. One of my friends reported to me that during the middle of the night he too heard footsteps coming down the stairs, and shortly after he felt his blanket slowly being pulled off him from his feet. Thank God that never happened to me. Another buddy claims he felt a gust of cold air go by, and as it did, a glass that was sitting on the coffee table in front of the futon that all my guests slept on tilted to the point of not tipping over but wobbling until it stopped. Footsteps during the night when everyone should be sleeping. My basement door opening but no one coming down. I got to a point for me that I had felt safer to sleep in my living room, in the basement on the futon, with the TV on every single night throughout high school. That's how I went to sleep, was with my TV on and volume on. I needed to drown out the silence. I felt like it would have drove me mad, or eventually make me hear things I didn't want to. Fast forward about a year or so, and I again moved rooms. My parents ended up moving out of the home and left it up to us 4 boys to rent it from them and take care of it until they will eventually sell off the house. During the time of my brothers and I renting the home, I felt older but was still young and dumb, and thought it would be a brilliant idea to buy a Ouija board and see if I couldn't get this spirit to communicate back, and once and for all figure out if this is just a little boy or what. I just wanted an answer to calm my sanity. Me along with a couple of friends. Each time we used it, we got no response. I tried a couple of times throughout the first month of me getting it. By this time in my life, almost everyone I talked to knew I lived in what seemed to be a haunted house. So when friends that don't normally come over, and knew I had a Ouija board, they'd want to pull it out and try to contact something. Again, we got nothing. Out of every time we used it, nothing responded to us. I did very sparse research on how to effectively use a Ouija board, but we always had hands on it and would always say goodbye. And when I would store it in my desk drawer, I would put a nickel on the board. I heard that's supposed to block a portal if there was one. Again, young and dumb. Again, months go by. It's winter time and I'm coming home and dropping off my friend at his place. It's really late, past 2 a.m. By the time I'm in bed and I'm just laying there. My brothers weren't supposed to be home, and one of them was drafted into the army at the time. So I was home alone. I know that for a fact. Maybe a half hour passes by and I hear my basement door open up, and immediately, just like what happened before when my friends was over, something books it down the stairs with no hesitation, and just a moment later it's jiggling my door handle violently. It was a handle, not a knob, and I could see it going up and down, up and down, up and down. I frantically call my friend, who I just dropped off, and he knows about the ghost and the experiences, and agrees to stay on the line with me for about 45 minutes. Then he passes out. Nothing else happened that night, but I was insanely scared and had chills running down my spine. Eventually I passed out as well. So there's one more story, which is the last thing I recall happening to me in this home. Thanks for sticking through this story. I've already gone through 5 tissues just typing this, because I've been tearing up just recalling all these situations. The last experience I had was with the same buddy who I called that night just after dropping him off. I was having a little get together, maybe 5 people, and we were chilling in the 3-season porch smoking hookah. Like I mentioned in the beginning, the porch is attached to the home, and I'll try to paint a picture of what my buddy and I witnessed. The porch shared a window with the kitchen and breakfast table area, so standing in the right spot, how convenient for me. You can see directly into the house and directly at the basement stairs. Just to the left of the stairs is the front hallway entrance. My buddy and I just so happened to look through the window at the same time, as if something wanted us to see, and what we saw, I believe, to be some type of bad spirit that manifested itself. The basement door opens up. No one's inside, we're all in the porch, and coming from the hallway, it wasn't a little boy or his mom like I've seen before. This was a tall, all black, misty, shadowy figure with jagged, rough edges that almost resembled a person-like figure, but more broad and didn't appear to have any legs. The figure slipped around the corner of the hallway and slid into the darkness of the basement, slamming the door behind it. Everyone heard the slam, but only my buddy and I were the ones to witness what actually caused it. I basically was stopped dead in my tracks. Everyone asked each other if they heard that door. We investigated, but did not go into the basement. My buddy and I went to the door and opened it, and found nothing behind it or at the bottom. we were too scared to investigate any further. That's my experience. It's also very important to note that the Ouija board used in the home is still currently in that home. My final room I stayed in. The closet didn't have sheetrock covering the ceiling, so you could see straight through into the ceiling of the basement and floorboards of the main floor. I ended up setting the Ouija board and its contents up into the ceiling of that room before the house was officially sold. My dad put a piece of sheetrock to finish off the closet. I never told him about the Ouija board or the crazy ass figure I saw. Weird experience from my old security days. 911 calls from no one. Posted by Beautiful Broken Glass. Seeing now it was Halloween, I wanted to tell you all a true story from my patrol days as a mobile security unit. Now I know what you're thinking. Mall cop, and some days it felt like that, but we also dealt with home invasions, domestic disputes, and very violent, intoxicated people while responding to home and businesses break-ins to assess the situation to see if police needed to be called. 90% of the time it was bullshit. Sometimes it was scary as fuck. Now I got this job at a small company with 4 patrol cars and 2 lead alarm responders. I eventually worked my way up to lead patrol officer with 20 people under me to manage, site people and mobile, as well as dealing with all the alarm response and trespassing. Before all that, I started on the lowest mobile route, West Eugene in Oregon. The outskirts of town are mostly industrial and commercial with some neighborhoods. I would start at 7 p.m. and end at 5:30 to 6 a.m. I got to know the other guys and women pretty well, joking on the radio, avoiding the tight-ass patrol leads at the time, following us, making sure we are doing our job. Each site was like a personality, you got to know it. We would stop by each site 3 times a night, remove campers, drunks, teens doing drugs, whatever. Some were creepy, like sawmills at night. The owls flying around in the warehouses made you jump, but this one site was unlike others, so it was my job to drop off the walkie-talkie to a site guy I became good friends with. Let's call me 926 and him 950, our radio code names. Now the site 950 was outside of town a little ways, secluded next to a huge wetlands field and 3 cemeteries. It was a huge site, probably 50 acres. Its own driveway with a creek dividing it from the rest of town. 2 big buildings, all glass, square, and none connected. One office building and the other manufacturing, surrounded by a field, the creek and a dead forest. The parking lot looked off into the field behind the driveway. Up the loading dock looked towards the wetlands and cemetery about a quarter-mile away. A community area with volleyball courts and barbecues were between the two buildings. Now, at first he always parked on the loading dock side, the most lighted area. I would come by on lunches and breaks to hang out and talk music, art, or whatever. He was a cool guy. We often debated supernatural things as well. He didn't believe in God, but did believe in ghosts. This place would continue to haunt us for the next 3 years of us working there, and here is what started it. After getting a couple more guys in our group, we found a cool spot to hang out by the creek, usually around 1 AM lunchtime. We found a memorial stone under a tree with 16 names written on it. Odd, we thought. After that we started seeing glimpses of people in the buildings out of the corner of our eyes, or moving past cubicles. All glass buildings means you can see everything inside from the outside. Even weirder, the motion sensors were not being tripped, and all doors were locked. After about 4 months, winter was coming. Fog was rolling out, and that's when things got weirder. We started hearing horse clops in the parking lot and field beyond. No farms or horses actually out there, just fields with air vents coming out, hinting at an underground structure to 950. One night 950 calls me up. He says he is actively looking for someone on the grounds and needs help catching them. When I arrive, it is foggy as hell, like I can't see past 20 foot foggy. I see someone running behind the farther building and proceeded to drive after him slowly through a gravel road that loops around by the tree and creek. I made my way around the building to the parking lot, only to find my confused co-worker. I asked him, what's going on? He says that he saw several shadows moving around the courtyard, so he thought people were trespassing. He heard voices, then they just vanished. There is only one way into the property, and I drove it. We made our way back to his car at the loading dock. We got out and started talking. Out of the mist came this faint, low-toned, like Dracula playing a recorder. It was faint and coming from the marshlands and cemetery, of course. But then it started playing behind us on the other side of the building. We started hearing footsteps and pavement as the drawn out flat recorders played louder, echoing around us like some ghost kid orchestra from hell. It made us feel sick. We ran around the building chasing footsteps and voices, trying to figure out where the music was coming from, but it was everywhere and nowhere. Whenever we thought we got close, we heard it far away from us again. I called the other units to head over. For some reason, I was convinced people were messing with us, even though it made no sense. It was impossible. 2 hours we ran around the entire property, but as soon as the fog died, so did everything else. It was like one of those surreal moments. Your body is so chill and icy, like it knows something you don't. Something is off about this place, and this confirms it. But it didn't stop with that. No, it wasn't long before one night 950 calls me up, said the cops arrived and needed to talk to me in person. I'm close enough. I get out fast and asked what the issue was. He says they got a 911 call from this location. I was confused, looking at 950. Did you call them? No, he said. We don't have any issues. The cop says weird because the call actually came from inside the building. I looked at 950. No issues? No alarms? No, he says. We take a walk around the building to look inside but see nothing. We even open the doors, check out the main room, call out but nothing. We trip the motion alarms going inside ourselves, so no way someone is in the building. I file a report for the police and my company, and we call it a weird day, thinking nothing of it until it happens again and again and again. The cops are so confused. Not even a glitch could cause this to happen. They started tracing the call to one phone, a phone just outside of the doorway, hanging on the wall and perfectly visible through the windows. This shouldn't be happening, but it did. No one talks ever, but the line stays open until dispatch ends it. In 3 years this happens 30 times on my shifts, about once a month randomly. Time is random. It continued to happen even after I left, and some of my buddies stayed on, as I took a better role in the company. I wasn't as available to witness anything more at that location besides talking with police about the phone calls. My new shift ended at 1:30 AM. Since I became the daytime lead, I actually grew up really close to this place and often used the bike path that follows the creek that gates it off to walkers by the cemetery, and years later I would patrol it at night. Sometimes I had to cover the shift and stay there myself. Every year we would find at least a couple of homeless people that died of the cold weather or starvation, camping far out into the wetlands. Whatever is going on here is very strange and surreal. I will never forget that night, and that nauseating music of the fog, and all the 911 calls that don't make sense. Six guys jumped out on me and my friends. Posted by Tracy V 1981. This happened to me and my friends 20 years ago. I am now a 38 female. I live in Tennessee and we have a place here. It's called Little Egypt. It's a swimming hole. Me and my friends had been there a million times at night. It was the middle of summer and the county fair was in town. Me and my twin sister and two of our friends had went out and hung out like teenagers do. We had run into our mum, stepdad and little sister while we was at the fair and told our mum that we was going to Little Egypt to goof off, as we had done a lot that summer. And I remember she specifically told me and my twin sister not to go down there that late because anything could happen. We was 18 at the time, and of course you don't listen to your parents much at that age, 'cause we told her she was crazy, nothing would happen to us. We wait till around midnight and decide to go to the swimming hole. It was me and my friend Lisa in one car, and my twin sister and our friend Heather in the other car. Now, when you get to the swimming hole, it is out in the woods, probably about 10 minutes from any civilization, and nowhere to turn around unless you go up the road. We pull in and get out of our cars. We are still standing pretty close to the cars because we hadn't gotten our flashlights and stuff we was going to take with us out yet. I started to walk towards the car my twin sister was standing at, and all of a sudden we hear some sticks breaking. I look at my sister and whispered, "Did you hear that?" She whispered back, "Yes." Maybe it was Lisa messing with us. We tell Lisa to quit trying to scare us, that it isn't funny. She says, "I didn't do anything." Then all of a sudden you can hear a lot of sticks breaking. My sister and Heather jump back in their car. I ran to Lisa's car. We barely jump in her car in time. She has automatic seatbelts. It nearly broke my shoulder getting in so fast. I don't know how we got the cars turned around in that little space we had, but we did. There were 6 guys dressed in black, head to toe with masks on, that jumped out of the woods right where we was parked, with baseball bats chasing after us. About 3 days later we went back down there, and there was police crime tape everywhere, and some other people was there. We asked what had happened, and they said some guy had gotten beaten to death 3 nights ago, the same night the 6 guys had jumped out on us. Thank God we got away that night. But my heart breaks for the guy that lost his life that night. But to the 6 guys that jumped out of the woods on us, let's not meet again. I Had Tea with a Murderer, posted by Kittlebean. This took place 20 years ago when I was 12 years old. Almost all of the details were kept from me at the time due to my age, so I didn't find out until much later what actually took place. My mother, understandably, still doesn't really like talking about any of this, as it was a really traumatic experience. It's only with hindsight that I've realised how genuinely creepy and horrific this whole situation was. In early 2000, I had just started high school. We lived a little way from school, so my mother used to drop me off in the mornings and pick me up in the afternoons. On 15th of February that year, I headed to meet my mum at the usual pickup point across the road from my school, but I was surprised to find my grandmother waiting for me there instead. My grandmother told me that my mum wasn't able to pick me up, so I went with her and we picked my brother up from his primary school. My sisters were both away on school trips. We went back to our grandparents' house, and my nana and my grandfather sat us down to tell us that something terrible had happened. Our mum's close friend, Vivian, had died the previous day. They didn't go into any details other than that Mum was obviously extremely upset. We were upset too. Vivian was a lovely lady, and we had spent a lot of time at her house over the years, not only because Vivian and my mum were close, but also because Vivian's husband, Andrew, was my brother's Cub Scout leader, and one of their sons was my brother's friend at that age. Nobody I knew had ever died, so it was quite difficult to process what had happened. We'd only just seen her the previous weekend. From my perspective as a naive 12-year-old, the following days passed mostly without incident, apart from my mother's obvious sadness. In hindsight, there was also an air of disquiet around her, but I didn't really clock it at the time. Around 2 weeks after Vivian's death, I was at home with my mother and brother, while my stepfather, a barrister, was out for dinner with a client. It was early evening, perhaps 7 p.m, and I believe my older sister was at her boyfriend's house, while my younger sister was at basketball practice. Our house has a large open-plan L-shaped room, which encompasses the kitchen, the living room and dining room areas. My brother was playing in his bedroom, while I was sitting on the couch watching TV in the living room area with my mum. From that vantage point, I had a clear view of the front door. The security light on our front porch flickered on, and there was a knock at the door. My mother got up to answer it, and as she opened the door, she took a step backwards and visibly stiffened. Vivian's husband, Andrew, was standing on our porch, asking to see my stepfather. I remember my mum explaining that my stepdad wasn't available to talk at the moment, and that if Andrew needed to speak to him, then it would be better to leave a message. Andrew clearly realised my stepdad wasn't home, and insisted on waiting for him. My mum repeated that it would be better to call another time, but he easily sidestepped her into the house and strode into the living room area. I can still picture my mother's forced cheeriness and frozen smiles as he sat down on the couch opposite mine and asked for a cup of tea while he waited. Mum, still with that strange smile plastered to her face, asked me to make tea while she told V's husband that she'd call to find out what time my stepdad would be home. I made tea for all three of us and sat back down on the couch, making awkward small talk with him while my mum repeatedly dialed my stepdad's mobile number. He wasn't answering. Andrew was talking to me, but I remember thinking it was rude that he didn't seem to be paying much attention to what I was saying. His eyes were constantly flicking over to my mum, who was standing at the phone in the kitchen area around 5 meters away from us. The whole thing felt very weird to me. She eventually got through to my stepdad and, still smiling, said something along the lines of, "Darling, Andrew is here." "Yes, here. In the living room." "Yes, yes." "He said he's waiting for you. You won't be long, will you?" My stepdad was home within 20 minutes and convinced Andrew to leave, with promises that they could speak on the phone the following day. I found out years later that my mother, stepfather, and the rest of their friends, along with Vivian's parents and brothers, all strongly suspected that Andrew had murdered Vivian. My siblings and I didn't attend the funeral. My mum felt we were too young, I think. But I later discovered that a police presence was needed at Vivian's funeral, which Andrew attended, because Vivian's brothers were so angry that there were concerns that they may assault Andrew, as they were convinced he had murdered her. That's how intensely people suspected him. My mum was utterly terrified when he showed up at the front door that night, but had been desperately trying both not to antagonise him nor to frighten me. It transpired that he had been interviewed by the police earlier that day, and it was clear that they were building a case against him. He wanted legal advice and potential representation from my stepfather, who refused. According to my mum, Vivian and Andrew had been having marital problems for a long time, and Vivian had confided in my mum and others that she had felt increasingly uncomfortable around him, and that his temper could be frightening for both her and their children. They were already sleeping in separate bedrooms, but he didn't seem to accept that the marriage was all but over. The previous weekend, she had told my mum and others that she was planning to officially leave him, and that she was going to be making it clear to him that it was over too. She was bludgeoned to death with a steel rod in her bedroom on Valentine's Day, when she returned home from dropping her boys off at school, having supposedly interrupted a burglary, though the police immediately realised that this was obviously staged. The contents of the drawers from the bedside tables and chest of drawers had been emptied out into piles on the floor, but there was no indication that these piles had been sifted through. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing was stolen. My mums and others believe that she had potentially rejected some form of romantic gesture and he'd snapped. However, there was blood on the piles of drawers' contents, yet no blood on the floor underneath, which suggests that burglary may have been staged before she even returned home that morning. Andrew tried to cover up his crime by deliberately driving to a series of shops and obtaining receipts for small purchases and making inquiries with cashiers to build an alibi. He originally claimed that he had visited a large shopping mall on the day of the murder and walked around there for quite some time, but 2 weeks later, presumably when he realised that the police could check CCTV and find he wasn't there, he changed his story and said he'd actually been at a popular local nature reserve, walking and reading a book. Conveniently, there is no CCTV in any part of that particular nature reserve, including the car park. He was not seen by any other walkers in that area. He had come to our house that evening after admitting earlier that day that he had initially lied about his whereabouts to the police. He was arrested soon after. Andrew has never admitted to the murder and was found guilty on circumstantial evidence. He was sentenced to 21 years with a minimum term of 16 years, meaning he may already be out on parole. I can't find any information about that online. However, I don't want to ask my mum about it, as I don't want to drag up those awful memories for her. Oh, and a few years later, Andrew also went through a phase of writing letters to my younger brother, who would have been around 11 to 12 years old at that stage, from prison, protesting his innocence. It was creepy AF. Some woman stood in my flat, right next to the shower curtain. This happened a few years ago in my old one-person flat. I had a strange feeling that something wasn't right for a few days. Like I was sure that food in the fridge was less than I put back the last time. I found pillows from my couch on the floor. Stuff like that. I lived alone back then, so there wasn't anyone else to access my flat, or so I thought. Well, one night I woke up at around 1 in the morning, sweating, and even though I didn't remember, was sure I woke from a nightmare. Since I was drenched in sweat, I decided to take a shower, so I put my phone up in the bathroom for music, turned on the water and enjoyed my shower. A few minutes in, I heard the door move. I never close it, but it still never moves. I took a look at the shower curtain and saw a shadow against it, and I look at my phone, confirmed someone was there, since I could clearly see a reflection in my screen that showed someone standing next to the shower curtain. It took me a lot not to scream and to keep acting like I didn't notice anything, while silently taking the shower head off, the holding and turning the water all the way to hot. I am still kinda impressed of that quick thinking. Our water got really hot when you cranked it all the way to hot, and a few seconds later steam was raising and the water hurt my feet flowing to the drain. I turned around, ripped the shower curtain open and held the shower head straight at the person behind. It was a woman. She screamed in pain. I whacked her in the face with the shower head and jumped out of the shower and ran to the door, taking the key out of the lock and locking it closed behind me. A little later she started to bang on the door, but the door didn't give. Thank God for German quality work. I called the cops and went to the kitchen to get my big kitchen knife just for safety. I felt like my throat was closing up when I saw it missing and realised there's only one place where it could possibly be right now. The police came and arrested the woman, who turned out to have been the former person living in the flat and was evicted after not paying her rent. Seems she made a copy of the key and came into the flat when I was at work and sometimes at night. It's possible that what woke me up in the first place was her, and honestly, I don't even want to think about it. Ever since then, I always insist that the locks are changed whenever I move into a new place. Edit. I found the knife later in the bathroom, so she definitely brought it with her, and either the police disarmed her or she dropped it herself at any point. Tinder date posted by Fisher. I would like to start this off by saying this actually took place a few years ago, but seemed relevant to post since a lot of people are doing online dating right now. One summer when I was in law school, I was swiping through Tinder looking for someone to hang out with. I matched with this guy who seemed pretty nice and looked good. Lots of shirtless photos. He was a counsellor at a local high school in the metro area. We texted for a while, talked on the phone, and then decided to grab lunch the next weekend. I met him at the restaurant and we had brunch with bottomless mimosas. He was nice and funny, made me laugh a lot. I think we both got a little tipsy. He said he was going to a barbecue at his friend's house afterwards and asked me to come. He seemed pretty cool and I was having a good time, so I agreed. I had to walk my dog because I hadn't anticipated being out that long, so I told him I would meet him back at the restaurant in 30 minutes. He said he really wanted to meet my dog and asked if he could come walk the dog with me. I thought about it for a second, but my place was a total disaster, so I told him no. I came back to the restaurant and we grabbed an Uber to his friend's house. There were a bunch of people drinking and talking. Everyone was nice. They had the barbecue situation going on out back. We talked to some people, hung out, drank. He started to get drunk and handsy, so I told him I wanted a drink and walked into the kitchen for some space. A couple of minutes later, he comes into the kitchen and tries to kiss me. I kind of smiled and shrugged my way out of his grasp and told him I need to go to the bathroom. I asked him to grab me a drink and meet me outside in the backyard. When I left the restroom, I walked straight out the front door, 2 blocks down, and took a right. I grabbed an Uber home. I started getting calls and texts, but blocked him. He tried to reach out over social media, but I just blocked him there too. Totally forgot about him. Fast forward 3 years. I'm sitting on the couch, chilling, reading through the local news on my phone. I scroll and see a picture of this guy's face. He had been arrested for raping women that he met on Tinder. Kitten Man, posted by bmos28. So, some background context. This was way back in the 90s, when our only option was a landline phone and dial-up internet. I was around 8 or 9 years old when my mom started leaving me at home with my oldest brother while she went to work. My brother was much older, around 17 at the time. As most teenage boys, his favourite thing to do was sleep really late during the day and stay up all night playing games. PS1, don't come for me, I'm getting old. I remember being bored, playing with my Barbies in the living room of my house, with the blinds wide open to let some light in and save on electricity. I would sit there for hours and play when Mum was gone. She always told us to answer the phone when it rang in case she was calling to check on us and make sure we were okay. I remember one day specifically, I answered the phone and just heard loud breathing on the other end of the phone. I kept saying hello, but no one would reply, so eventually I would hang up. This went on daily for about 2 months. and it was always in the morning time when my brother was asleep. Being a naive 8 or 9-year-old girl, I didn't really think anything of it, and eventually the calls stopped. A few months go by and I'm sitting in my living room floor again when the phone rings. I hear the same breathing again and say, "Hello, who is this?" To my surprise, a man replies and says, "Hello, kitten. Do you remember me?" I remember being surprised that he called me kitten, but replying that he had the wrong number. This is where it gets creepy. He then replies, "No, kitten, I have the right number. You're wearing a kitty shirt right now." I remember looking down and immediately panicking and hanging up the phone when I see the tabby kitten on my shirt. The phone then rings again and I refuse to answer it. I run to wake up my brother and he sleepily follows me to the living room. The phone rings again and he answers it, but no one is there. He then unplugs the phone and tells me that it is just my imagination and to leave him alone so he can sleep. Being scared, I decided to close the windows and sit on the couch until my mum got home that afternoon. That night I told my mum what happened, but my brother told her I was making it up and that he didn't see or hear anything. I think my mum believed me, but she just told me to hang up the phone if it wasn't her and to never open the door for a stranger. I agreed and told her I wouldn't. The next day my mum was off work and she took me to the store with her. We were walking around when I noticed a man in a long trench coat. I thought the coat was weird, but didn't really think anything else of it. We then ran into one of my mum's friends who has a daughter my age. My mum and her friend were chatting away and my friend and I were standing a few feet from them messing with some birthday cards. We went around to the other side of the cards to look out of sight of our mums. Suddenly the man with the trench coat is right near us, looking at the cards too. He then picks up a card and turns to me and my friend and says, "Hello." Being polite, we responded hello back. He then starts picking up cards, saying he's getting his daughter something and asks what we like. My friend points to a random card and he smiles and says, "That is nice." He then picks up another card and shows it to us. The card has kittens all over it and he looks directly at me and says, "I'm sure you like kittens, don't you?" I didn't really know how to respond and remember feeling extremely nervous. He smiled when he saw me getting nervous and says, "Kittens and Barbies." This kicked my fight or flight into action. At the age of 8 or 9, I nervously laughed and said we had to go back to our mums now. The man then reaches out and grabs my arm. My friend takes off running around the corner to get my mom. The man tries to pull me to the front of the store, but I kick him as hard as I can and go flying out of his grip. He then gets up and runs out of the door. About the time that my mum makes it over to me, the police are called and a report is filed. To my knowledge, they never found the man, but my mum was extremely paranoid after hearing the link between the phone calls and the incident, and she found a new house in the city right over from us not even a month later. Thankfully, that was the last time I heard from him. So all I can really say is, Kitten Man, let's not meet again. And that's it for tonight, my little hellhounds. I hope you enjoyed these scary stories. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at homeofscares and submit your stories to Reddit r/homeofscares. Good night, my little hellhounds.